Welcome to the Futurisity Podcast. This is an episode with Yen Ho, Senior Analyst Data Engineer at Avanade. Her specialization is computational linguistics, natural language processing, machine learning, and text analytics. In other words, Yen is trying to teach computers to understand, process, and generate natural language as we humans do. So it's great to have you here, and thanks for finding some time for the episode, Yen. I'm really super excited for this conversation and the episode about robots, language, machine learning, and ethics.
Thank you so much for this great introduction, Vlad. I couldn't have summed it up better, and I'm so delighted. And I'm so honored to be here. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Before you introduce yourself, I'm really curious about one thing, namely, if aliens are going to visit us on Earth one day, will we be able to find the proper language so we can understand each other? Like, will we be able to communicate in a how it will be? What do you think?
I love this question. I've never encountered this question before personally. And first of all, I have to think about the movie. First of all, Arrival. So I've watched it like a couple of years ago, and it really enlightened me in some ways as my past. I have some linguistics background, as you might have seen. So I had my bachelor's in linguistics, and I have to say this was one of the movies which really catch me because it really focused on the intention of communication. It was not mainly about the communication as a language itself, but more about the terms of what you want to achieve with language and how is language being perceived. So it really covers a lot of philosophical questions and also linguistics questions, which are being dealt with there. And I believe, in comparison with our history, which we had when we discovered new civilization, it may take some time to encode and decode language at some point. But also, on the other hand, like communication is so much more than just language, right? We have
Exactly.
like, yeah, we have the signifier and significant, like what you want to like show with your language, demonstrate with your language, what is like the intention of the language as mentioned. So at some point there might be some miscommunication, but that also happens within the same language because like we have different conceptual understanding of a concept of some cultural backgrounds. So and at some point we need to probably make sure that the intention from both sides are being cleared, that yeah, probably no harm is being intentioned. And then at some point maybe, like I would say, like the emphasis is on maybe communication might work, because you can see like even in politics we are trying to talk and speak in the same language. It's not always the same. We always
Yeah.
have conflict. And probably I assume that there might be some conflicts depending on how we're dealing with it.
I was thinking quite a lot about what happens if aliens come to my house just like, spontaneously, and will I be able to find the proper language with them? In my eyes, I was thinking about more some kind of communication protocols between aliens and humans.
Mhm.
And I think the most likely outcome will be, as you've mentioned before, when we were discovering civilizations, this kind of discovery step by step
Mhm.
in terms of understanding some physical gestures. Also, the intention is very important. Why are you here? I mean,
Mhm.
what's your purpose? What's your needs? And this step by step discovery, I think it's going to be fun. I mean, if it's not dangerous, it's going to be fun.
I mean, like Columbus was also some kind of alien back then, right?
Yeah,
When he
totally. Yeah.
arrived in America, right? In the United States back then. And I mean, like how it ended, we all know from history at some point. And
Mhm.
at first, the people were quite friendly and they tried to communicate, and it really worked at some point. Like, you can work it out, but still, like at some point, if one side has another intention than the other one and the decoding of the communication doesn't work as expected, and the other one is taking advantage of the other party, it doesn't work. So I believe that at some point we were the aliens of some civilization, they were some aliens for us. So we can take that as some kind of comparison as we had in history,
Yeah.
and work on that maybe. But yeah, interesting question, I would say.
Okay. So now, why wouldn't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Yen, and I think you mostly took it all up in a summary that I couldn't even like put it better in a few sentences, but there's even more. So I have my master's degree from LMU here in Munich, and it was mainly in computational linguistics. So I had my master's of science there. Computational linguistics focuses on natural language processing. So mainly it was on deep learning and machine learning. And also there I wrote my master thesis about yeah, NLP also, but it was mostly about argumentation mining, which was about detecting argumentation in a text. And previously to that, before I did my master's degree, I had a linguistics degree in French and English, so Romanistics and Anglistics in German.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I did a hard and rough path into the technology, but I wouldn't say that I would regret it. It's not that I would say that it was the best choice that I've ever made
Really?
in my life. Yes, definitely, definitely, because I'm quite proactive as a human being, I would say. And I really enjoy to make something out of my knowledge and really build something out of it. And I think linguistics is an interesting path as it is because it deals with very philosophical questions and a lot of communication theory, which interested me back then. But at some point, I noticed, okay, so this is the dead end for me here.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that at some point at work, I want to be more, yeah, active at some point and being the person who implements something
Mm-hmm.
and not just using language as a tool, but using a tool as itself to convey and use language itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, totally, totally. Based on that, what makes you wake up every day in the morning?
Well, I wake up at 5 every morning, usually
Really?
when
That
I'm not sick.
early?
Yes, yes, that early, and I go to the gym. So
Mm-hmm.
I have my routine. So I wake up. I basically just try to jump out of the bed. It doesn't work every day, I have to say, but it took me some time to build up that habit. I used to have that when I did my bachelor's degree and starting my master's degree, but at some point when things got too stressful at university because I barely slept, I have to say. So I'm those kind of persons who really don't need a lot of sleep and can still work. But if you don't sleep at night, at least you need like 2 hours maybe, and then go to university. So
Mm-hmm.
at some point, I dropped that routine. And now that I have some feeling that I'm like settling down at work, I feel really comfortable at my position right now. So I can like start getting up at 5 again, going to the gym, and then start working at 8. And yeah, mainly I wake up to build on my routine, of course, and also like focus on the challenges that are soon be coming up to me. I'm usually very looking forward after, like when I walk back from gym, usually I make up my mind about what I want to do. So I have my to-do list in my head, and then usually I get back, shower, and then do everything else before that. But then I want to really get on the challenges that I was
Mm-hmm.
facing yesterday to continue there.
Okay. For me, it was more also some kind of general topic. What is the reason, like, what is the passion behind waking up every day in the morning? Because when I was 16 or 17, back in the days in my school time, I've asked myself, like, I don't know where I found this question, but I've asked myself, like, why you wake up? Like, what the reason? I mean, there should be some meaning in waking up. It's more like kind of from philosophical perspective.
Hmm.
What the reason? And I'm really curious about other people's experiences, why they wake up. And I've heard like already plenty a lot, from joy to technologies to people connection, like really the very bright perspective.
Yeah. And I think it's a super important question that you're asking yourself, because I've had that question as well during my studies, like especially namely during my bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, like, you need some kind of meaning, right? And some kind of meaning
Yeah.
in your life, some kind of meaning in your work that you're doing. And mine back then was when I made the decision to switch to my master's degree. And really, it was not easy. Like, it sounds so easy now when I'm talking about it, but you can imagine, like, with somehow no technical skills, no mathematical skills after 4 years of studying in the bachelor's degree, um, I wanted to actually revolutionize the tech industry, being part of it, because right now I would say, like, we are in industry 4.0 and we're like developing further, we are getting faster, moving on, and with all the technologies which are coming towards us, I wanted to be part of the people who understand what's going on. I didn't want to be the part where they see everything as a black box or being afraid of technology. I wanted to be the part who really build and shape the future. And this is
Hmm.
exactly what I'm doing now. So now that I'm doing that, my meaning of the morning is just get to the routine, because at the end of the day, maybe you don't like this answer, but it's just a routine,
Yeah, of course,
because
totally.
at the end of the
Everyone.
day, it's your work and you have to deal with it, because like the work, sometimes your work is pleasure, sometimes your work is passion, but most of the time your work is routine. It's mainly routine.
Totally.
It can get frustrating at some point, because the challenges are quite hard sometimes. Sometimes the challenges are not technical, sometimes the challenges are people related, sometimes they're process related, and that's the reality. So
Mhm.
at some point I wake up and I was like, okay, this is exactly what I do, this is exactly what I always wanted to do. I see the meaning there, but it doesn't feel like it should be feeling as I imagined it like 3 years ago before I did my master's degree.
Mhm.
So I had to put in the meaning for myself, and the meaning for myself is now learning and getting more in depth into what I'm doing, because I still have the feeling that I'm not there yet. I have the feeling like I'm still missing out somewhere. I still
Mhm.
want to get better.
It's imposter syndrome
Yeah.
for a lot of people. It's a big thing.
You're not the first one telling me that, but you know exactly in our field especially, you can tell that there are so many people who are like really competent, really in depth in their field, and they know what they are talking about, and I really admire those people. I look up to them. And for me it's just the beginning, because so I did my master's degree 2 years ago, so I've
Ah,
been working exactly for 2 years now. And it's been a rough path, I would say. I learned a lot, and I had a lot of like mainly work focused challenges, which are not technical only challenges, but at some point, like, you get there and you need to get up and build your day. You have to
yeah,
make the best out of it, right? You have to be efficient, you have to be effective, you have to be this and that. And at some point you just like wanting to rest, which is also fine, I
of
think.
course, totally.
And for me, it's definitely gym. I need to go to the gym.
Good way of switching off your head and just go with the flow, accept
Yeah.
the life as it is. But that's why I've started fencing, for example, in August last year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
fencing
need
is
that.
fencing is amazing. I mean, you go fence, you switch off your head like 2, 3, 4 hours. You just do nothing else as
Mhm.
fighting. And in a fight, if you transfer yourself back into the ancient times where people were fighting till the blood and there were like one winner, the last thing you will think about is like what I have to do on my work, what I haven't done at home, or about some university classes, about your degree. That helps me a lot.
I think you need some kind of passion there as well. So I, besides gym, I also go dancing, of course, something else, because gym alone is for me also not enough. But you need some kind of passion besides work or technical
Totally.
development, because
So
because
absolutely.
you need that space or that break. Otherwise, like, if you're too focused on something, you will be focusing on probably the wrong things and don't get to the right solution, because
Mhm.
we probably both know how it is to sit on a code and work on that program, which just doesn't work. You sit there like for 2 days, and then at some point you're just giving up. You're just stepping out of it, just doing something else. And then 2 hours later, you get back and suddenly you see the issue there and have the
Yeah.
solution
It,
within
and
20
then it's
minutes.
like 5 minutes and pum 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 done.
Exactly, exactly. And you're like, what? I didn't even see that. I didn't even like that. That was something like so simple. It wasn't simple before, but because you had that headspace, and there's like a technique even behind that. And I read it in a book. I think it was called How to Excel in Maths or something like that.
Okay.
I read it before I started my master's degree, and it dealt with different kind of techniques on how to solve problems, and I really like that. And so I always try to step back a bit when I see, okay, there's like no way to get any further here.
According to your CV, you can speak 7 different languages, regardless of proficiency. And it's absolutely impressive. And I have a huge respect for people who can speak a dozen of languages. And of course, there are different language groups, families, alphabets, all that kind of stuff. And for you, it may be like, of course, not that difficult, but for a normal human being who speaks like 1 or 2 or 3 languages, it's very difficult. So, firstly, which languages do you speak? And secondly, which one is the most complicated in terms of learning and in terms of mastering it?
Okay, so maybe I should say, like, let's emphasis on proficiency because they're not all at the same level.
Yeah, that's what I've said,
So
regardless of proficiency. So.
exactly, exactly. So I only work in German and English because
Mhm.
I feel like the most secure in those two languages. And yeah, let's start off. Like, I will start historically, and like based on my past, how I learned those languages. Maybe that's more connected to each other than just starting with the best language and ranking them down, because like probably it doesn't tell everything when I just say, okay, I have basic knowledge in, let's say, Chinese. So let's start. So there's one language which I haven't listed. It's Teochew, which is like a dialect. It's a very rare Chinese dialect. It was my
Okay.
very first language that I learned from my mother and from my grandfather. I would say it's my native language, but I have forgotten it. So you can indeed forget languages. I don't even mention it anymore. My second language was Vietnamese, because my father is from Vietnam and my mother was born there. They decided to, like, at some point raise me when I was 3 or 2 in Vietnamese so that I can talk to my father. I still do talk in Vietnamese and have like very easy conversations in Vietnamese, but it's not the same as in German. And
Mhm.
then when I was no, actually 3, my mom signed me up for Chinese Mandarin school. So
Mhm.
I went to Chinese Mandarin school, and I even learned a bit of writing and reading and speaking there until I was 7. So it was before my elementary school. And then my mom decided, like, okay, it was too much. Like focusing on German and Chinese would be too much of it. Yeah. I learned German in kindergarten when I was 4.
Mhm.
So imagine, like, I entered kindergarten without knowing one word, one single word of German. It was a huge cultural shock for me. Even though I was born and raised here, I didn't spoke German back then. But yeah, my parents put a lot of effort in there to, like, get me into school, get me like a private tutor at home and everything. So yeah, at some point it felt very natural for me. I think children learn very fast there. So I
Mhm.
would encourage every family, if they have the possibility, to raise their children multilingual. And I usually say I was raised trilingual, and which
Mhm.
is true. And yeah, and at some point, so my parents had a restaurant and I learned Cantonese there. I spoke a lot of Cantonese. So at some point, my Cantonese was even better than my Mandarin. I still do speak some Cantonese, but I'm quite shy because
Mhm.
it's been 4 years. And at home, like, we watch movies in Cantonese. My mom was very proficient and very good in Cantonese and very fluent there. So I also spoke Cantonese. Yeah, and at school I learned English in the 5th grade. And as you can see, I do still feel comfortable with English. I think a lot of children with immigrant background, they usually learn a lot of languages, but It's just not, it doesn't get the spotlight as it deserves. So usually in
Mm-hmm.
Germany, what the teachers would say is like, try to speak German to your children, try to speak German at home, which I don't agree with, because like you never learn German as good as you can like at school. So
Mm-hmm.
at some point, for me, it was the same. So I watched a lot of German movies. I went to school, spoke German and everything, and it was fine. Yeah, and at school I learned English. At some point I learned French. Before that I learned Latin as well, but forget Latin. Latin is dead, basically. I learned French in the 8th grade. I stick to that until my A level. And then during university, I stick to French and English and got to a very high level there. Unfortunately, like when things got rough during master's degree and everything, of course I dropped French, so it's basically non-existent anymore. I also learned Portuguese, and Portuguese was back then quite good. It was okay good. Like I could held conversations in Portuguese, and I was at B2, but now it's also gone. So joke, like as soon as I learned programming languages like Python and R, I forgot every human language. So that was a bit of a long story, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it needed to say, because I never really properly learned all of these languages.
So
Like if
basically,
I
it was go with the flow, and the
exact
languages stuck to you, and not you
exactly.
chose the languages.
Yeah, yeah,
Ah,
yeah. I didn't really choose it. Like, okay, I chose French and I chose Portuguese at some point, and now I really want to learn Spanish, but I don't find the time. But the thing is, how it happens is like if you show interest there, just follow your path and then it will all go together. And back to your question, what was the hardest language for me personally to learn was probably French, because I really tried to get in depth with the grammar. So, and when you want to be in depth of anything, it doesn't matter what language, it's always difficult. Even English can get really difficult if you get into the grammar for some
true.
people. Yeah, but for me, English was not the issue. French was, but I also wanted to be really good in French, and getting better there was a hard and rough path, because I never had issues learning anything at school. For me, at school, I never even learned like grammar or vocabulary, because it just came to me at some point, and I just needed to read something and it was okay. I was not like excellent at it, but it was also not bad. But at university, you really have to understand grammar, explain it at some point. And I was also a private tutor for some kids, and it
Mm.
was hard. It was hard because kids have like the best questions. Something it's like you
Oh
question
yeah.
your life decisions.
In my eyes, one of the most difficult languages was definitely Russian,
hmm
because we're learning it and it was so crazy. There are some grammar rules, there are some vocabulary rules, whatsoever, but there are so many exceptions that you cannot even believe. And it's my worst mark in my school at Estad. It's absolutely phenomenal. In my eyes, if I would have answered this question, the most difficult language in mastering and in terms of learning from the
hmm
grammar side and vocabulary side is definitely Russian.
Oh, I believe that's a thing. Like I had friends who learned Russian as Germans, and I thought about learning Russian as well, just because I'm interested. But I thought, okay, I have the option to learn Russian or something where I'm sure I could master it and at some point have conversation. So I decided to go with Portuguese. I mean, I forgot everything now, but back then it was possible. And with
Nevertheless, it's
Russian,
just a matter of time to bring it back into life
yeah,
and just to refresh it in the mind. So
exactly, exactly.
how do you learn new languages? What are your best practices and tips?
I have some, but it's not a standard approved approach, I would say, because I usually start off like with songs and movies and with
Mm-hmm.
subtitles, and then I start to catch up at some point a bit. Like this is how I approach Spanish right now, and then I get back to the rules and study the rules, and then get back to the yeah, practice again, the exercises. So for me, it's like more. I don't have like this typical, okay, now I sit down and study the grammar first, study the vocabulary, then I try to watch movies to understand something. Because for me it's a lot harder to sit down and motivate myself
Mm-hmm.
there. And what I do is also what I can also recommend everyone who tries to learn a new language: talk to yourself. This helps a
Mm-hmm.
lot to have dialogues and actually like pronouncing words to yourself, and just try to form some sentences, and it helps. And I think the hardest part is actually to try to get off this wall in front of your like head, and to get rid of that. And at some
Mm-hmm.
point just that, and that's why a lot of people speak a lot better in a foreign language when they're having a bit of alcohol, because like they just let go.
Yeah.
And exercise is like the key to everything, and not just like in written form, like really like use the language, talk to people. And yeah, I'm the kind of person who's not afraid to make mistakes. And I think this is key to learn a new language, because if you're afraid to make mistakes, you're probably not a good language learner. You're a perfectionist, and perfectionism would hinder you to get further
That
there.
was my biggest struggle. I've managed to banish it, to make it
Hmm.
disappear, but that's exactly what I was facing back in the days when I was learning German. This if I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of saying some kind of grammar rules incorrect to the native speakers, and for me it was like, oh, probably I will not say some like one more sentence because I've made a lot of mistakes already and I will not do it. But since I've managed to make it disappear, was go with the flow. It was like such a learning curve, really like going into the space. Like, so it was really fast.
Yeah, exactly. And just imagine like an alien coming here and learning our English language. Like, how amazed would you be? Even though it's not perfect, like you would be super amazed, right? You would
Yeah.
think like, oh my God, that's the wrong tense you're using. What are you doing? Right? Like,
Totally.
and this is like something that you need to keep in mind, or we all need to keep in mind. Like, people are just amazed that you're putting in the effort to learn the language,
Hmm.
not like that you're making mistakes. And if someone thinks that, they're just a jerk. Sorry to say that, but
No, no problem. No problem.
yeah.
We have freedom of speech here. You can say whatever you
Yeah,
want.
right. But nobody would care, I believe.
Yeah,
And that was also for
should be
me
natural.
personally. Exactly. And this was like, okay, I'm fearless at some point. I am not afraid to make mistakes. Probably I'll be a fit in technology maybe as well. So maybe this fearlessness, let's say, drove me towards NLP and a bit away
Hmm.
from language, but it drove me towards Python, maybe, let's say, to learn a
Okay.
new language.
Talking about a natural approach to learning languages, we've arrived on our next topic, natural language processing. Yeah, natural language processing, or shortly NLP, refers to the branch of artificial intelligence and computer science concerned with giving computers and robots the ability to understand text and spoken words in much the same way as humans do. Of course, it is a very bright term, and in a very broad way, there are plenty of subdomains such as chatbots, virtual agents, some different sentiment analysis, machine translation, also all the translators out there using NLP, and so on and so on and so on. Those are some of examples of common NLP problems or challenges, let's say. Imagine, Jan, you've been given a task to develop an algorithm that can perform semantic analysis on the documents, or in other words, identify the meaning of the language used in those documents. What are some common steps in order to solve it? Maybe you can decompose it to the basic principles from the NLP perspective.
Sure. So actually, this was a very common task we had in our studies back then. And I actually also had part of it also in my thesis. And yeah, it's very I would say generic steps that I usually approach and do, which are first of all, decide on the data set that you want to use, that you want to train the model on. So first of all, you want to import them and load the data. So this is the first step. So you decide to take in the data. Usually you have like a huge data set. It could be either a Twitter based data set, which would be the easiest way probably to handle because like they are short, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they usually have like a similar length, which also plays a role later on. And so you first import and load the data. Second, which is like the huge step and probably would take you the longest is data pre-processing. So what does it mean? Data pre-processing, you make the data fit in a right format for the next step. You need to remove certain nulls within your data set because you usually have them data are never clean. You have to clean them first. Emojis, for example. Think about removing emojis or leave them in and decode them, also possible because usually emojis do contain some kind of snippet information about the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it could be a discussion there as well to keep
Mm-hmm.
and decode them or remove them. Second of all, remove the stop words, such as is or like typical article words. And so you could think about that. Sometimes people just keep the stop words because they also contain meaning. I remember in my thesis, I did not remove the stop words. It also depends on the framework that you want to use later
Mm-hmm.
on. Think about removing punctuals within the pre-processing steps.
Yeah.
And that is usually, I would say, initially the first step that you also do removing punctuals because they're not containing any meanings. It depends though, because like if a user uses a lot of like exclamation marks, it might
Yeah.
be like, okay, he's super angry now, and you might want to keep them. But usually for word embeddings later on, it's just confusing, so we want to remove them.
Mm-hmm.
Next step would be typically what we always do is the tokenization. So we
Yeah.
tokenize the words, so we split them in order for the next step to build up a reasonable dictionary. And yeah, and then next step, before we do anything, we think about like balancing out the classes. So if we're working here with labeled data, we want to even out the classes because sometimes you just have more negatives than positives data. Let's say they are labeled. And, like in Twitter, people usually put Twitter up when they're really angry, but
Yeah.
still we
Classical
want
data
to,
set on
exactly.
Twitter sentiment analysis.
Exactly. And also like if you're working with different kind of languages and we want to build like, for example, a translation model, we also want to use like data which are like balanced out because otherwise if you have like imbalanced classes later on, it might get into some biases. So
Mm-hmm.
be careful there also. So next step after we have had the pre-processing, we want to go into the embedding. So we're building our dictionary there based on the embedding. So embedding is a kind of a representation of words in vectors.
Mm-hmm.
And there we think about, okay, which classical embedding do we want to use? Do we want to use to, for example, word to vec, Gensum, Clovey, they're like weights that you put on.
Do you know how it's computed? What the math and in simple words, what the math
Oh, in
behind it?
simple words, oof, it depends really on so there's like one fast shot. So usually when you have like the position of one word,
Yeah.
you put it based on the neighbor of the words, you put in a number on it, let's say. But you
Okay.
can also weigh it based on the neighbors. So fast forward, let's say like with word to vec, you see, okay, you check out, for example, the position within a vector. So one vector, let's say, is one sentence, let's say, or one phrase, one snippet, and you put in for each word one number based on
Mm-hmm.
the position, and then you have like your word representation. But for each different embedding, every vector, or let's say every word representation or phrase representation is being calculated differently.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like we're getting more into the data science based, I would say, discussion, NLP data science discussion that usually also takes a bit of, I would say, scientific research. What would be the best? Because sometimes it could be Gensum. Sometimes you want to use fast text from Facebook, and or use BERT from Hugging Face, or Clovey. So I remember that I used Clovey. And back then for me, it was like the best because it took the best contextual meaning out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to solve context based meanings, for me back then, for my task at least, like really make it task related, Clovey was the best. But in another task, it could be BERT.
Mm-hmm.
BERT for me back then was no option. I remember because I was comparing my data with BERT outcome. So I didn't use BERT.
Okay.
But really, like usually task by task, make it depending on that what embedding you want to use.
I remember when I was applying for the internships, I had a couple of them in a NLP, and I had to learn basically all the concepts of word embeddings, tokenization, stop word removal, and stuff. It wasn't that complicated. I didn't have to write like a complex machine learning model. It was more writing a model and to show the understanding of a meaning, what NLP is and what kind of steps are needed in order to solve, for example, that kind of semantic analysis problem. And yeah, thank you very much for that introduction into NLP world and how does it work for all the
Last but
listeners.
not at least, you need to build the model also.
Yeah,
and
sure.
then and then the last but not at least, you have to evaluate it. These are
Of
like the
course.
two last steps.
Of course.
And that's it.
For me, it was more about semantic analysis to
Yeah.
like this really from raw data that you have,
Hmm.
plain text that you type on your keyboard, to the system that can understand what you were writing inside of these
Hmm.
documents. It can be Word document, PDF, comments. Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't realize how much mathematics are or statistics are actually behind it. Like as
yeah,
I tried to initially explain a bit of the embedding, and you can see like how difficult it can get or complex. And I try to really
totally.
make it simple. Um, but simple is sometimes not the right explanation because
Mm-hmm.
there is like a lot of calculation behind it on like how high is the probability for the next word, for example, if we have like a very simple and naive approach. But
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is like also we calculate them based on the contextual meaning. So if you want to have more context behind it, like what calculation you want to use there, in what training steps and what training um, calculations, or what model you want to really
Mm-hmm.
use. And these are the questions which are more data science based, and there that you want to ask yourself as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of math and statistics behind it. And I remember when I was learning about these vectorization steps, cosine similarity metrics was horrible. I mean, it wasn't horrible. It was definitely fun, but it was kind of a lot, and it was only for some simple steps
Hmm.
that are already a standard in the industry. I would be pretty curious how knowledge of multiple languages help you solve problems in the NLP sphere.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, like none is probably also not the right answer because it did help me. Like I would say general language understanding does help you because at some point, like I applied, for example, POS tagging.
Mhm,
And I realized, okay, it makes sense to tag the words here. Now POS tagging is like when you tag the words according to nouns, adjectives, and so on.
mhm,
And it made sense there, and it really helped the model to improve because we had more grammatical knowledge there. And also, like I also suggested to implement an ontology tree at some point. Ontology tree is a kind of network tree to actually finding out which word net belong together and do signify a similar meaning
mhm,
for semantical tasks. And it helped there at some point, but I wouldn't say that I, yeah, by knowing a lot of languages or multiple languages helped me there because like my expertise in languages are also like, I would say quite small compared to some people out there who are like really experts in
mhm,
the languages. So I think deep language understanding helped me a bit, like grammatical understanding helps me there. Knowing multiple languages, not so much.
Okay. What is the most difficult NLP challenge that you faced and how did you solve it?
Well, making my data fit into Bird, or like in general, like if you have like a framework that you want to work with, and then let's say TensorFlow or even like PyTorch, and then you have to make your data fit there. So the pre-processing part there, the embedding part, are usually the most difficult parts for me personally. I mean, for some people, it's another path. But I had like back then when I worked with Bert, for me it was difficult to get the data in format to work on with the paddings in PyTorch, for example. So they were more like small technical tasks, let's say, not the
Mm-hmm.
bigger ones, but also the other things which I didn't really like were like well, building trees at some point, building nodes, and we
Mm-hmm.
had to build those automates to build trees which read like the prefixes or like
Damn.
to decode yeah, the suffixes. Those kind of tasks weren't fun. They were like really hard because you weren't allowed to really use libraries, and they were really dry. The use cases were like just read a prefix. It
So you
needs
had
to
to
give out a prefix.
develop the framework like by yourself in order
Yeah,
to read the prefixes and suffixes and stuff like
yeah,
this.
exactly. And it had to build like a tree which recognizes what is a prefix, what is a suffix, and give out the prefix part and the suffix part, but not the middle word, like the stem.
Yeah.
And it was like a really dry task. And I remember like it was really hard because like we weren't allowed to use any of those NLTK, any
But
libraries which could have done that task, but we weren't allowed to.
maybe it was useful in terms of learning and understanding how the things works from under the hood. Of course, like as in many things at the university, you will never use them in your like work life or career for sure. But
Yeah.
I guess by understanding really low level principles is pretty important. And I remember when it was, I guess, half a year ago or something. I was doing some development in the CNN, and I was trying to build it by myself for the image object recognition on the different images. And there was this Mint data set, I guess, with the handwritten digits. I've tried to build a model that can recognize those digits. Was kind of fun, and I've done it on purpose just to understand how the CNN works, because for me it was like so abstract term of, how does it work? Like what the hell is happening under the hood? And I found a couple of good tutorials. And it, from my side, it's highly recommendable to understand the basics, but it's not necessarily the case to learn everything from the low level.
Yeah, I don't think that you need to know how to build a tree in order to build a CNN network. I mean, like we also had those tasks, like CNN is also part of NLP. A lot of people don't know that, or working with the LSTM, naming the
Mhm.
RNN. But yeah, they wanted us to work on a tree, but it was like, as you said, maybe it was from programming side really useful to get there, and to having to build a tree at first there was really hard for me, like not even like working on machine learning models first.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it was a difficult task, and I know I don't use Uconan suffix tree, or I will never use it in my life, but it was still interesting, and probably now in the hindsight also fun
Mhm.
at some point. And I don't want to miss that, I have to say.
Ethics is a big topic talking about intelligent computers that are able to chat and speak. Undoubtedly, AI can bring plenty of benefits to humanity and help humans solve some real world problems. Nevertheless, those systems can also be very harmful. Racial bias, gender bias, harm for free speech, political misinformation, and many other issues. As an example, there is such a task in NLP as a hate speech detection. On one hand, it can be beneficial in fighting hate crimes. For example, to my mind, Instagram and Twitter are using that kind of NLP task and making internet more friendly space. On the other hand, it can be potential malicious use of such systems, such as censorship of free speech and therefore freedom of basic human rights to speak what you think. And yeah, from the ethical perspective, what do you see the current state of ethics in NLP? What are the risks and potential benefits of conversational AI?
It's good that you're mentioning those social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook because I have also both of them, of course, and I even have TikTok just to see how it works, like because I'm a very curious person. And they work mostly or the most efficient with their filtering system of keywords. So whenever like you're using a certain term that you're getting banned, you're using a certain term which is being like lowly ranked, you're getting like banned, or people will read over your comment and probably censor it. And TikTok, many people know it's Chinese, for example. They even have more words that they don't want to use, and mainly political based keywords and terms. And these kind of things can happen, but it's up to you, I would say, to use that platform or not. Like, of course, it's a platform to spread information, but if certain information cannot be spread, people will still find a way. And I noticed that, like, people use some kind of words that they mispronounce it, like,
Mhm.
accordingly. So
Yeah,
everyone
exactly.
knows what it's being meant, but it's not being recognized. So people will still find a way. And I find it like really interesting and also creative how people use their freedom of speech. And even like in Germany, you can do it, even though the platform forbids it, you can still find your way. So, and getting back to your question, I see there's like already something going on because as a working student, I used to work in sales for talent software.
Mhm.
Namely, like if you're working in HR, you have some kind of software which filters your CVs and your motivational letter based on the keywords that you have in there. Like they have NLP, but very basic and simple NLP. At some point, the candidates, and I'm also recruiting people. I used to recruit people in other companies. I used to see those percentage, how they match to the position. I
Mhm.
see it based on the keywords they have in their CV. I see it based on the skills that they claim to have based on the CV, and I see it based on the skills that we want to have. So there's some kind of matching ongoing. It's not bad. It helps the human reasoning. It helps you to drill down your decision making there.
Mhm.
And I usually say it's like a decision, not a decision making machine, but it helps the human to make decisions. It's probably easier to say it like that. But I don't like how humans are being seen as a forecast or a number or a statistics, because at some point you can't really see if that person is just unskilled in writing CVs or writing motivational letters, or if that person is just faking it. We have a lot of people also in the pipeline who probably just try to make the best out of their CV. And it
Yeah.
works because they know, okay, there are like certain people who just use this and this keyword just to appear more competent. And I don't like that because I know that there are people out there who do these kind of trainings, who do these HR trainings, who watch a lot of videos based on that. But I want to see that human being who are motivated, who want to learn things, who want to learn about technology. And that makes a huge difference. Like you can bring in the skill, but on a certain level, you don't bring in curiosity, you don't bring in that kind of motivation that the people want to have
Yeah.
on the job. So that's what I see. And also the other thing is like I've watched another documentary on pre-crime, which is dealing with crime-based data, of course. And you
Mhm.
have mentioned it, like data can be also very racial profiling and going into that direction. And that's why at some point we need to make work of balanced data and balance out classes which are like imbalanced there. It's really hard, but at some point, like with CVs, for example, it's really hard there because we need like a certain representation of a certain, let's say, group, and people with different skills there, but who also bring in the same motivation and also
Mhm.
the same qualification. It's really hard.
Absolutely. The most difficult thing about those AI systems in human resourcing is in the first line to understand when should be the decision made by a human at the end. Of course, it's very helpful in terms of reducing the bias and helping in general, like to minimize some kind of effort that you put into reading all these CVs and writing out some kind of keywords, okay, or skills or programming languages or whatever. And to be honest, like in our very first episode here of this podcast, when I've just started, we had the discussion with Bruno Capuano from Microsoft, and we were discussing Amazon case where Amazon had developed an AI-based recruiting tool to spot potential candidates, not within the company, but and not for a specific role, but internet-wide. And basically, the algorithm was scraping the web, rating potential candidates from 1 to 5. And the algorithm learned to systematically downgrade women's CV for technical jobs such as software engineer or AI engineer, whatever. And some of the researchers out there were pretty positive about the algorithm by claiming that humans also make mistakes and algorithm is just helping to minimize an amount of hours that you put into web scraping and going over all the LinkedIn profiles, whatever. Right now it's shut down because it was like a very hot discussion a couple of months ago, half a year ago maybe. So, but here comes another question. I'm really glad we've touched this topic because it's really important, I think, to discuss from an ethical perspective. Like, where is this border between AI systems that can exist independently, and we already use plenty of them, recommendation systems, forecasting systems. I mean, everyone knows Netflix or Amazon, Facebook feed,
Hmm.
Instagram feed, TikTok, Reels. I mean, it's everywhere. And no one controls it in terms of human control at the top of the chain. And on the other hand, there are some system at this, for example, HR AI-based system that still should be controlled by the human in order to make a decision. Okay, we'll take this person, or we'll take this man, or we'll take this woman for this specific position. So where's this border? What do you think?
My personal opinion, and I only like have to accentuate that it's my personal opinion here, is that whenever a human future is being relied on the system, there should be a human involved. Because like at some point, it's easy for a recommendation system to make a decision based on the rules that you're putting in. But I think at some point, like to drill it down, the final decision should be made by human so that you can make it more transparent. Because of course, like if a machine or if a system makes the decision, you always have the explainability of a model, which is also part of Azure's transparency and AI ethics
Mm-hmm.
principles, of course, as you know. But at some point, I think, for example, like if we're sticking to the HR example, you can disclose all genders, for example. You can also remove all the birth years just to not discriminate people and so on, or take in only the last 5 years of experiences, and then just like yeah, erase all the other experiences, because like someone who has like a lot of experiences or long experiences probably is older than someone who has like just like 5 years of experience. You
Yeah.
can delete that, of course. Like, and these are questions that you need to put in when you build a model based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, you will also be able to remove candidates who are probably not a fit into the skills, but at some point also influence the model there, influence
Mm-hmm.
it in some kind of like more human way, I would say.
Yeah.
Because like if you're working with quantity, a system will always help you positively at some point. So I'm not a fan of saying, okay, when it comes to human decision making, and when it comes to humans, we should disclose all systems. No, that's not the case, because as a human, and especially namingly HR, they have to deal with tons of like CVs that they have to deal with.
Yeah.
And they sometimes also
Uh-huh.
have biases. They have biases. We get trainings, but sometimes when you look at a picture and that person is like just not it, I don't know, or the name or something, or I don't know, like it sounds really bad, but sometimes it happens. If
That's
and
exactly the point.
exactly, and if you have that in a human being, you will never say it out loud, right? You will never say it out loud, even though like, and sometimes you have that person who's just like on the paper not it, but a machine or a system will always be neutral there,
Yeah,
as long as
exactly.
you keep
That's
it
the
neutral.
point. That's exactly the
Yeah.
point. Why it's beneficial and why it should be implemented into the recruiting process. It doesn't matter. Is it a big Amazon or a small, I don't know, small company here somewhere in Hamburg? The process should be using this AI system to minimize the bias in terms of filtering the candidates, but the decision at the end should be made by a human. As you've said, everything that's concerned to be with a human being and human existence
Hmm.
should be dealt by humans. But on the other side, there is a question of, you know, Instagram, Facebook feed, TikTok. They're shaping our future every day, like multiple times a day, showing us some video that we already like, and that's also bias. Why no one's control these recommender systems? That's kind of tricky question out there.
It is. And also, like, I mean, if you're thinking about the bias part, I mean, you can also like implement it in your process that you need a certain amount of, let's say, female or like people from a minority group like being handling in their CV until you really start the recruiting,
Mm-hmm.
so that in the end you don't take like only three white males in your first round, and so in the end like you have the final white male in your last round.
Yeah.
Let's say if you're like really harsh about it, like, and if you're really harsh about it, you can like say, okay, let's say at least in the first round we need one person with minority background or a female there before we start going through that, and that person also needs to hit the mark like the others, so we don't start before we have one person who hits that mark.
What if, let's say, for some specific role, now let's move away from IT sphere and go to nursing sphere. I got the idea of general pool with different groups from minority to like the most common groups, and we have the same ratio for every group. It means like white male, white female, male, black female, like are all equal in this pool, right? What happens to those male and female that are not in the pool but have way better skills rather than people who are in the pool? You got the question?
Yeah, I do get it. It's not easy. I mean,
It's
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 like a
so
human,
tricky, eh?
it's a tricky human based question, and I would say even like more human related than machine related, because like at some point you always have to make that decision, right? You have
Yeah.
to this hire or fire decision, and at some point it gets back to the cultural fit or cultural add-on or some things like that, and we're always biased there at some point, like because you think, okay, can we work with that person and so on, and so
That's exactly the
this
question.
is like the ethical question, which is not only technical related. And I would see that ethical question in general are getting more and more into the technical field because we have to deal with them. But we do have them, even though we don't have the systems. So this is like something I don't like when they say, okay, like AI can't be ethical responsible. No, because we haven't dealt with them so far, because I personally haven't dealt with that. But they have always existed. Philosophy is so old, like it goes back to the antique, because we have been dealing with that, and now we are just dealing with that in another circumstance. So I think that at some point, governance, data governance, AI governance needs to be in place at some point. And to get back to your question, where do I see the fine line where humans definitely need to get into it? I mean, what I don't like at all are AI being used in wars for face detection, face recognition, drones
That's
following
a
humans,
huge
and so on.
topic in Russia, in China, in Belarus. in all those countries.
It's huge everywhere, and also in Germany it's a topic, but we don't speak about it. But yeah, I mean, like for me personally, I couldn't work on a system which tracks down humans for facial recognition, for example.
100%.
Personally,
Me neither.
yeah.
Me
Yeah,
neither.
I couldn't do that personally because I have disclosed that I couldn't even work in HR for such a company because I don't want to name any names, but we all probably know some in Germany which are quite well known, and they are also here in Munich. And for me, it's personally not justified to work on a system where I know at some point I'm helping the system to track down and probably end some lives. And
Hmm.
it happens every time. And I've heard podcasts about that as well, that you don't get rid of them. They just follow you until you go to the basement and, like,
Yeah.
finish things off. And hearing those kind of stories, I think at some point it's not the AI system, it's just the human developing a kind of very dangerous weapon.
That's also like a big topic. Probably we'll discuss like in the next episode what happens if AI will be dangerous for the humanity in general. For the majority of people, it's like, phew, it's like maybe in 200 years, 300 years. But look, I mean, we didn't have internet like 100 years ago. And right now we're developing computer that will, we're speaking about general AI.
But we still had nuclear wars, so back then, like, we didn't
That's
really had
fucking
computers. But yeah,
insane.
yeah, and we had nuclear wars, and it's still a topic. And even without AI, or AI is just a tool, like it's like a
Hmm.
knife, and humans use knife every day. Like, and I need a knife to cook, so
Yeah.
I need AI to work. I need AI in my everyday basis, to make things going on, and I'm proud to be part of that industrial revolution, let's say, and being part of that. But I wouldn't be proud to be part of something where I know, okay, I'm not sure if I'm like responsible for people's lives.
Hmm.
Let's say I wouldn't want to be that part. So,
Yeah.
and I know that people are working on that part as well. And I don't want to judge people for doing so, of course. But
Yeah.
at the end, I believe if we are building these kind of systems, at least there should be a human behind it to pull the trigger. Like, at least we know someone who makes a decision in the end. I don't know if it makes it better. It doesn't
Yeah,
probably.
that's the
It
point.
doesn't. It doesn't.
Tricky question. How long do you think, Jan, will it take to build a human level intelligence system that will speak and write as an ordinary human? So
Good
I will
question.
not differentiate between is it Jan or is it like AI Jan?
Hmm. What if I tell you we're almost there? We have GPT-3, and probably many
Yeah.
people who are in this field know that GPT-3 is already able to summarize text, is able to really answer naturally. And I had the pleasure to work on GPT-3 a bit, or at least on the sandbox with it. And I was quite amazed because I have heard of it during my studies, but never really work on a demo there. And I was lucky enough to work with a client on that case.
Hmm.
And it is very, very, very natural, I would say. Like, you would think it is a human. It could be a very friendly human, even though at some point, of course, you get the feeling that it is a machine. But I do get the feeling sometimes, like, if you turn out that it is a machine, you're not sure if it's human or not. And the next question is, what is intelligence? So intelligence is something where you put a lot of things into context, right? You get the grasp of a lot of things. You have the answer to a lot of things. And GPT-3 is trained on a huge data amount, a huge one.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, if you are trained on a huge data amount, and certainly a lot of people get to their dead ends point at some point, but a machine like doesn't, at least like not that fast, it makes you intelligent. So I had the feeling like GPT-3 works quite well there, but of course, like, there are like certain things where I see some points it needs to be customized, and it's not there yet, I would say, because like it would be ideal if you could customize it on certain areas and fields more, and
Hmm.
train it on specific data more, so that it becomes an expert there, because a human makes a human because you're an expert in some field. You're like, I would say, individual in the way you're talking. And I believe, like, if I were to build a model which trains on my WhatsApp data with GPT-3, maybe I could, like, at some point build
So
a
you can
yeah.
imagine that I will not differentiate. Is it like yen yen or
uh,
AI yen texting me?
well, it would get really generic, I would say, because I'm not able to build such a good conversational AI agent,
No, no,
which
but I
is
mean,
like as convincing.
if we take like the best model we have currently on the market and train
Hmm.
it on your WhatsApp data,
Yeah,
damn, that's
it's
that's scary
possible.
and impressive at the same time. On our Futurisity podcast, we also have a special rubric named Blitz. The idea behind it is very simple. I'm going to ask you questions, and you have to answer them without any kind of deep reflection and pondering. Simple, straight away. The answer should be more or less short and to the point. Try to follow your heart and not your brain, and try to catch the first answers that come to your mind. Ready?
Okay,
If you had an opportunity to catch up a coffee with one person that were alive, who would it be?
Obama.
What are the biggest ways of human potential?
Intelligence.
Interesting. Intelligence or wisdom?
Intelligence.